I'm here to share my COVID vaccine experience with you today. It is now 2 days after I've gotten the vaccine, and I've gotten the AstraZeneca vaccine. Now, I did ask a couple of you on Twitter and Instagram if you have any specific questions, and there have been a couple. Some people wanted to know how it is with the social distancing, how that can be possible in the doctor's practice or office, and how that process of getting the vaccine in the first place happens. Someone else asked about how quickly I got the vaccine after signing up for the waiting list. And some other people were mainly curious about how I was feeling afterwards. There was also someone who asked about how my vaccine that I got compares to other vaccines that are on the market in terms of negative side effects or consequences from after getting vaccinated. So first of all, I want to say a little bit about the vaccine that I got. AstraZeneca is also known as the Oxford vaccine since it was developed at the Oxford University. It is a British-Swedish vaccine. I personally am from Germany. I live in Germany, and I found out online that not everyone knows that the vaccines available and on the market in the EU are different ones than, for example, in the USA or in Russia. So depending on where you live on this lovely planet, you might have my vaccine, the same one, available, or you might have completely different ones. All of the different vaccines are also still being researched and observed while they're already giving them out, and that is important to know. AstraZeneca is a vector vaccine, which can be compared to the Johnson & Johnson one that is available in the US, and Johnson & Johnson is currently not available in the EU, not yet at least. Now, some components from Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca are the same, so they both build on a flu virus, but they also have some components that are different. And AstraZeneca is known as a 2-vector vaccine, while Johnson & Johnson is a 1-vector vaccine, and they both also have something in common with the Sputnik vaccine, which is the one used in Russia. Those three are more comparable than the other 2 vaccines, which I'm just gonna quickly mention because they're the other 2 available in Germany. There's, next to AstraZeneca in the EU, there's also BioNTech and there's Pfizer. BioNTech and Pfizer are mRNA vaccines, so the way that they work is inherently different from AstraZeneca. BioNTech and Pfizer, as well as most other mRNA vaccines that are available in the US, for example, you get the first dose, and the first dose is not as bad in the side effects, and then 3 to 4 weeks later you will get your second dose, which has worse side effects. Another difference between the vector vaccines and the mRNA vaccines is how well they can be stored, which has a lot of effect on how well a country can produce a vaccine and how well that can be transported and for how long that can be stored before it goes bad, which is obviously important when you're thinking about wanting to vaccine an entire population or an entire country or an entire continent, right? So that is very important to the different countries and the regulations. Now, while the mRNA vaccines are supposed to have a higher efficiency, so they're the percentage in which they protect you or an individual is higher, it's much more difficult to store them. You usually get the first dose, which is not as bad in the side effects. 3 to 4 weeks later, you get the second dose, which is much worse in the side effects. With the AstraZeneca vaccine that I got, as well as with the Johnson & Johnson and the Sputnik, as far as I know, it's much easier to store them. So you can store them in much milder temperatures which makes it easier for countries and companies to store them, and you can also store them for longer before they go bad. And with those is that you get the first dose and your side effects are going to be much worse than at the beginning. Now with the AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, Sputnik, and so on, with those vector vaccines, apparently it's that you can store them in much milder temperatures and for longer before they go bad, which is obviously super important to keep in mind for an entire company or entire country. Even with those, with the vector vaccines, or at least with, it definitely is with the AstraZeneca that I got, you get the first dose and your side effects are going to be much worse then. And then not 3 to 4 weeks, but 9 to 12 weeks later, you get the second dose and your side effects are supposed to be much, much less worse. Now let's say that again. Vector vaccines, much worse in the first dose, and it's a long time until you get the second dose. On the other side, we've got the mRNA vaccines, which are not as bad in the first dose and worse in the second dose, but it takes much less time until you get the second dose. The vector vaccines like AstraZeneca are much easier to store and make it much easier to make sure that you can vaccinate an entire country, for example. While on the other side, we've got the mRNA vaccines, which are supposed to be more effective, but much more difficult to store. You need much colder temperatures, and they go bad more quickly as far as I'm informed. And the second dose is what's worse in terms of side effects, but the time is shorter, right, between the two doses. I think that covers the good ground knowledge, some of the stuff that is important to know. Let's get to my personal experience, shall we not? Within Germany, there are different states within Germany. So different, you might say counties. The German word for it is Bundesländer. And in mine, the process of getting to the point of having the actual vaccine appointment was different than it was in, or than it is in some other Bundesländer or counties. So my mom, for example, lives in a different county than I do, and she has put herself on the vaccine waiting list earlier than I did, but I got the vaccine faster. The reason for that is that there is a main vaccination center in each county. Sometimes there are multiple vaccination centers for areas, smaller areas in a county. And that's usually where you would be put on the waiting list, where you would get your vaccine. And my county just recently made it so that they kind of distributed this big waiting list onto different general practitioners. So every general practitioner who has gotten a little part of the waiting list has a much shorter waiting list. So after being put on the general overall waiting list, at some point, I think it was last week Tuesday, I got a call from the doctor. And I didn't know that doctor before, but he called me and he was like, hey, so you are on the vaccine waiting list, and they have now distributed that on local doctors, and you are number 5 on my list. So I'm now spending my entire evening calling each and every single person on this list, trying to make sure that everyone can get an appointment. And he said, and that was on a Tuesday, right? And he said, so the first appointments that I can offer you are Friday or Monday, which is like a couple days within the same week, right? And I was like, let's do it Friday. And so Friday came and I went to the address that he had given me. I looked it up online. It was it is an actual doctor. It was not a scam or something. And I went there and obviously had to wear a mask, and they basically let in only so and so many patients at the same time. And there was always only 1 or 2 people at the registration counter, just giving them their insurance card and getting a paper where you fill out your general information. And they also ask you if you had gotten vaccinated for any other allergies recently, because there needs to be a 14-day period between any other kind of vaccination before and after you get the corona or COVID vaccine. Now, after I filled out the form, they asked me to go into the waiting room, and the waiting room is a room where basically they just have very few chairs, like 6 chairs maybe, that are put very far away from each other in that room. Everyone has to wear a mask, obviously. When entering the doctor's office, you also have to disinfect your hands and everything. And you just sit down and you wait a little bit, and then the doctor at some point calls you into his room, and you get to ask any questions if you have any. We had a little bit of a chatter about the different COVID vaccines that are out there, people's reactions on all that, and then he gave me the shot right here, and you have to afterwards go back to the waiting room, wait for another 15 to 20 minutes to see if you get an allergic reaction or if you're doing okay, and then you get to go home. They give you the appointment for the second dose already, which, as I mentioned, in my case would be 12 weeks later. But they also did say that even the doctors are currently still getting different new information from day to day from the vaccine center or our government, with new updates on what the newest, updates from research are. So it might be that before I get my second dose, the doctor could call me and be like, hey, so the newest status quo is that the perfect waiting time between the 2 doses is not 12 weeks, but 10 weeks, or maybe 13 weeks, so we're gonna move your second appointment. And they warned me that that could be the case, and now I'm just prepared. I'm happy that I got my first dose. So that was the process. I talked to the doctor about the fact that some people don't want to get vaccinated because they are worried about the side effects, which is a big part of why I'm making this video. Now, let's go through the different worst case and best case scenarios between getting vaccinated and not getting vaccinated. Let's say we take me, Niv, and we make 2 of me, and one Niv gets vaccinated and the other one doesn't, right? Now, what's the worst case and the best case scenario for the Niv that gets vaccinated? The best case scenario is that I get vaccinated, I barely have any side effects, and I'm protected from the COVID virus from then. The worst case scenario would be that I have terrible side effects for, let's say, 3 days, I think is usually the longest that anyone suffers from really bad side effects so far. And I'm terribly sick for 3 days. And then again, I'm much better protected from getting the actual coronavirus from then on. What's the best case scenario and the worst case scenario for the Niv that doesn't get vaccinated? Best case scenario is I never get coronavirus, I don't have to deal with it, or don't even have to worry about it. Worst case scenario is that sooner or later I will be confronted with someone who has coronavirus, I will also get it, and I might either have terrible complications from getting sick from corona with maybe long-term lung damage, or even I might actually die. Now, the best case scenario is being totally fine. The worst case scenario is death. If I compare those two, I personally will always prefer being sick for 3 days over being dead. Now that's just me, but that is the simple formula of, do you want to get vaccinated? Should you get vaccinated? Is it worth getting vaccinated? Yes or no? And we're talking about a vaccine. My vaccine is the one that is so far known for having the worst side effects. And still, with that equation, it makes much more sense for me to get vaccinated rather than not getting vaccinated at all. Now, the next question is about my personal experience of the actual side effects. I went to the doctor feeling entirely fine. I was lucky to get an appointment or to be even allowed to be on the waiting list rather soon because I have bipolar personality disorder and epilepsy, so I am more vulnerable to the vaccine. Anyone who has a certain age or anyone who is maybe immunocompromised or other things might also get on the list earlier. I think that's at this point something that almost everyone knows. People that are more vulnerable get the vaccine earlier. So by the point that some other people will get the vaccine who are less vulnerable, let's say young, healthy people that are not immunocompromised or sick in any way, there might be entirely different vaccines available by the time that you get your vaccine, so please make sure that you stay up to date. My personal experience with the side effects was that I was entirely healthy, or feeling well at least, when I went to the doctor. Then I got the vaccine, and the needle and poking in the arm didn't really hurt, but the area hurts, or started hurting and still hurts 2 days later, like a bruise basically. In between it hurt a little bit more, but just like a worse bruise, still like a bruise. I started pretty much immediately getting a headache on that day after the vaccine, and that stayed for the entire rest of the evening. I got the vaccine in the afternoon, at like 5 p.m. afternoon, and just had a headache, but I was feeling fit. Other than that, I was in a good mood. I even streamed for the rest of the evening, telling people how I'm feeling. I was in a really good mood and I was feeling well, except for a small headache. Now, the night that then came was very uncomfortable, to say the least. I am usually a person that has a very, very deep sleep, very restful sleep. That night I did not. I had woken up multiple times, so many times. I had very late sleep, I had terrible nightmares, and I ended up waking up super early in the morning from a nightmare that was so bad that I had decided for myself that I'm not going to go back to sleep because I didn't want to go back to that nightmare. I'm just gonna say they were like fever dreams, basically. Then I woke up and I was feeling miserable. My eyelids hurt so bad that I had to try and keep my eyes closed while not falling back asleep. My limbs hurt. I still had the headache, and I was just feeling incredibly sluggish and like I had a flu. Like I had a really bad flu. I spent the day in bed resting. At some point I moved over to the couch. I was still resting. I had one of my roommates I had to ask them to make me food, and I wanted to stream that day originally, but I really could not. I had a slight fever, and I would say by the afternoon that same day, I started feeling much better already. So 24 hours after the vaccine, the shot, the actual point of the vaccination, I started feeling better. So I had like really bad, I would say like, let's say the day of the vaccination, I was fine. And then I had like maybe 12 hours of feeling really, really, really bad. And then I started feeling much better quickly. I decided to still rest the rest of the day of that day after the vaccination, just to make sure that I'm going to be feeling fine. And this is today. I don't have a headache or any other kinds of pain except for here where it still feels like a bruise, but I'm not sluggish in my brain anymore. I'm motivated, I've got energy, I'm doing well. I'm glad that I got the vaccination. Now, let's address some news that I read in the papers, in the newspapers this morning. Because in Germany, there's now news about all of the side effects being worse than they were expected with this vaccine, AstraZeneca. And apparently there are now places like hospitals in France, and I think one even in Germany, and another one in a different country that I forgot, all in the EU, who have paused or basically stopped giving people AstraZeneca for now because the side effects are worse than expected. Now, I'm a 20-something-year-old person. I don't have any immunocompromised illnesses. I'm not immunocompromised. I am vulnerable, but not as vulnerable as, let's say, for example, an old person with diabetes. The guess so far is that people, like, the more vulnerable you are, the worse your side effects are gonna be, obviously, to this vaccine. But you also have to keep in mind that if you have a fever or if your body is showing signs of struggling, that means that your immune system is working because it feels attacked and it's actually actively pushing against the virus that you basically, or the vaccine that you've gotten into your arm. And that's a good sign. It doesn't feel fun. It's not good, not fun to have, but it definitely means that your body is fighting and that the vaccine is working. I will stay up to date with the news. I will stay up to date with when my second dose is supposed to happen. The status quo is, as I said, 12 weeks, and I'm just curious how other people are gonna keep talking about it, because I know that people get very easily frightened by news, and that can be an issue because the side effects are worse than they were originally expected. The side effects in that way were expected, but not as intense and not as common. In my opinion, absolutely doable. Like, even if I had felt shit for the entire 3 days, which are currently known as the worst case scenario, I would rather have that than be sick from actual corona. My stepsister is at home with corona, and she has been sick for 2 weeks now. She's in bed, she can't do anything, she can barely get up to go to the bathroom. She has her boyfriend making her food. She has our mutual parents bringing them food from the grocery store to the door, where her boyfriend then has to cook the food and bring it to her bed. She's completely miserable for weeks, and she might have long-term damage from being sick from corona. So just keep that in mind. And that's all the information that I've got so far. If you want to stay up to date how I continue to feel, you can check in with my streams. You can find all of the links to my socials, like Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, all of that sweet stuff down below. You can also check out my merch if you would like to, and you can go to my Ko-fi page if you would like to commission me for something, or if you would like to help me out getting a proper vlogging camera, because I'm currently recording all of this with my phone. Say hello to my little boy down there. Say goodbye, baby. Good boy. And I'll see you next week. Bye.